My name's Jeffrey St Laurent. Welcome to the Tuesday call, and I have a very special guest I'm going to bring on in just a second, and we'll introduce her. But today's call is, of course, being recorded. To me, this is one of the most valuable calls I've done in the sense that I've done a few of these in the past. I have gotten some great reviews from them, and so it's really interesting to see what we can create today. And the essence of the call today is essentially where I love to show real-time what's going on behind the scenes and what I like to teach. And essentially, today's call is basically how to follow up for a year to get a client. And it doesn't sound like a very sexy topic at all. And most people would think like, what? Why follow up for a year to get a client? But basically what happened was my client now that I have, who's on the line, I'll introduce her in a second. But basically we started interacting in my Facebook group over a year ago at this point, and started doing some videos. I was commenting on those, so forth and so on. And then we started going back and forth via Facebook Messenger. And then that conversation carried over into email. And over the course of that time, there was interest in potentially working with me. But again, how it all unfolds, as I always talk about in my teachings here with selling coaching is, timing and need. Those are the things we're going for. And of course, you've got to be able to understand that as we go through this, because everyone's not necessarily ready right now, but they might have a need. And so as we go into today's call, what I've wanted to do is take that email thread, starting off with a Facebook Messenger thread and then over into email, and go through it step by step and talk about, what am I thinking on my end? And then I actually have my new client on the line, which I'll bring on in a second. And so she can kind of pipe in on her end to see, like, what was she thinking about? And I really, an opportunity to get a chance to see, like, this actually happened. It's unedited. So this is time stamps, date stamps, things like that, so you get an idea of, like, how long in between emails or messages. And I'll just go into some of the things that I think about having done this, for the last 12-plus years, so you can get an insight onto that. So with that being said, Marty, are you there?
I am here.
Awesome. So Marty, thank you so much for volunteering to come on. Obviously this process is a personal process, and you share some personal things in here as well. So I appreciate your willingness to just open up and not be anonymous, so to speak, and share your end on the potential client end now then becoming a client. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
If anyone's following along on the call right now, or obviously if you're watching the recording of this, you'll be able to watch as we go through that email thread. But as I go through, I'm going to refer to the emails as by their number, and then we'll be going from there. So basically, we'll start off on the first thread. And what I'll say is, essentially, when we start off with this, it was Marty had come into my private Facebook group, and you had started the Visibility Challenge last year, correct, Marty?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were working with the Visibility Challenge, and so from there we started interacting, and we had some I think messages back and forth, like in the Facebook group in terms of what you were doing. So I got a better understanding of what you're doing there. So this first message right here, we actually started off on Facebook Messenger. And, I wrote to her, hey, how you doing? I saw your video. You were in a down mood, doubting yourself. I want to help. And so I come right in there, and this is obviously of March 25th last year, to give you kind of a time reference. And she had posted a video in the group. Basically, she was in a down mood. And what I want to point out right away is and people will see this the more you're in my private Facebook group, the more you see I'm interacting with people, is anytime someone posts something, in this case it was actually a video, but it could be a comment or anything like that, what I teach you behind the scenes is we've got to interact with people. Anytime someone does something or says something in a post or a comment, or even, especially if you don't have anything going on, even if they like something, any type of a reaction, if you will, like in a Facebook situation, for instance, we want to engage with those people. So this first, message here is me just engaging with her and asking questions. So like me, hey, how you doing? I saw your video when you're down mood. I want to help. and being very direct because we had some type of a relationship, from the credibility from the Facebook group already and our interactions there over the past 3 months at that time, and so Marty being, thanks and better, I made it in the moment of the mood, so, she tends to deliver what's on her heart. And so that's just where I started off at, and I'll bring Marty to this into a second, but I want to start going through the thread a little bit here. And if you notice as I go into number 3, that she responded back the same day a few hours later, and I went back, from the 25th to the 29th, and just responded in the third thread, I love how authentic you are. I can tell you really want your business badly, and I will say here, I was fairly direct in what it seems like early on, where I say, I want to mentor you. I so want to mentor you when the timing is right. It's killing me because I see so much potential with you, and you're right there. So what might seem like, wow, Jeff, you jumped right out of the gates, and I didn't even necessarily ask her if she would hire me. But if you notice, I'm showing my enthusiasm as I support her and I engage with her, and in making a statement like, oh, I'd so badly want to mentor you when the timing is right. And then, of course, Marty responds in the fourth one there, the same day, just a few hours later, love you too, I'm getting there, let's set up a call next week, I'm working out of town this week. So I'm curious, Marty, at this point, obviously we had some communications prior to this even starting and developing a relationship, getting to know each other, you trusting me, you had been to several of my Tuesday calls at that point as well. So when I asked, when I didn't ask you this, but when I talked about this and saying, I'd love to mentor you and the timing's right, I'm curious, just what were your thoughts coming into this?
I think at that time I was, I knew that's what I wanted, and I was terrified at the same time. Oh, yeah, I need to do this, and oh, crap.
So when you're saying terrified, you think knew you wanted to work with me?
Yes. I say that in a kind of a joking way, and I was really afraid to really get out there and really invest in myself.
Yeah, what was it that you were in that space where you were afraid?
It's the same story. I was afraid of being seen. I would live most of my life wanting to be a wallflower or trying to be a wallflower. It's never worked, but, trying to be that and knowing that's not what I'm here for.
Interesting. So when you say afraid of being seen, it's actually now you'd have to get your stuff out there and do something.
Yes.
Interesting. Yes. So this is why I love doing this. I learned from this too, because when do you ever get to kind of interview your client almost after they hire you? But this is a great place to understand where these people are. And obviously, I'm in the niche of helping coaches transition to a full-time business. But whatever niche you're in, you have to realize, whatever they're looking to accomplish in their life, they're scared. They're scared of actually doing it. And by hiring someone like yourself as their coach, obviously that means it's not about the money. It's never about that piece. It's about wow, I'm going to actually have to do something now, right? And you've got to be ready for something like that. And that's where that timing piece comes in, So here's the interesting part. So she responded the same day a few hours later and says, hey, let's set up a call next week. I'm working out of town this week, right? So I respond back the next day, good for you. This is in the 5th email thread. Good for you. I'll follow up with me when you return. And I'll say that I wrote that specifically because I just wanted to see, at this point, if there was no engagement in terms of me asking specifically, but I thought, hey, she said, let's set up a call. But I said follow up with me because I wanted to see if she would actually follow up with me or not. Just a pointer, most people won't follow up with you. That's the reality of it. So when I said follow up with me when you return, what I also did was I went in my calendar and I put it just over a week, after she would have gotten back, and I just wrote up, follow up with Marty, and made any notes to myself in my calendar, and then I could just forget about it. And this way, when it came time for that day, if I hadn't heard from her at that point, I know I could follow up as well. And of course, in the 6th part, she just wrote thank you. And then if you notice, I'm going to go from, she wrote that on the 30th of March, and then we go to the 7th piece there. On the 13th, still hadn't heard from her at that point. All right, so I had wrote to her, and so this is basically, 14 days later or so, a couple weeks later, hey, hope you had a great work week and are back settled in. You had mentioned your last message that you want to set up a call for when you return. Are you still interested in doing that? Tell me more about what you're thinking. And then if you notice, I say, if it's okay with you, I'd love to continue this conversation via email, and then I gave her my email, all right? So a couple things here that are important to note. She never followed back up with me, which is fine. I don't want to assume anything at this point because when I created those statements in the previous messages, there wasn't any resistance to it, and there was obviously a favorable response. But with that being said, she said, hey, I want to set up a call, but she never followed up with me. So not only here, if you notice when I go back right into the key point to clarify, are you still interested in doing that? Meaning, you said you wanted to set up a call. Are you still interested in doing that? Tell me more about what you're thinking. So if you notice, I'm very direct. I share a little bit of, hey, I hope you had a great work week, blah, blah, blah. And then if you notice, I want to transition this conversation to email. That's what I prefer to do as opposed to any social media platform. I just know for myself, it's much easier to respond, and I also recommend this for people, especially if you don't have their emails. It's better to be working with them from an email standpoint as well. And so she wrote back to me. So here's what I want you to notice. I wrote to her 2 weeks after I asked her to get back to me on the 13th of April. Now, over a month later, on the thread number 8 there, on 5/19, right, she gets back to me via email, all right, and she says basically, so this is over a month later, dreamt about you last night, so it's clear to me it's time to set up an appointment for a consultation. All right, so this is so interesting because what's interesting here is that, I'm not getting a response, and I want you to also understand is when you're not getting responses, this is a perfect example of this. Don't think it's because people aren't interested or they're forgetting about you or they're ignoring you. It would be very easy for me to think, okay, well, maybe I came on too strong. Maybe I brought up mentor coaching too early. Maybe I didn't know her well enough or know her needs, and start going in my head about everything. Should I email her back? Am I being pushy? I haven't heard from her. But what I want to teach you here is I don't think any of that stuff. I never assume any of that stuff. I have a good barometer when I develop a relationship with somebody, and if they don't want to get back to me, then if it's something worth following up on, I follow up on, and I'll allow them to tell me that. So I'm curious, Marty, from your standpoint, you don't have to give us the details of what was going on in that time frame necessarily, but why do you remember? Why was there such a gap? You went away for a couple weeks. You said you wanted to set up a call. I emailed you back a couple weeks after you got back, and then, a month after that, you finally get back to me with this dream. And it sounds like almost if you didn't have this dream, you might not even have gotten back to me.
I don't even know. I have to look back at that year because I remember we were gearing up for our ceremonies coming up. So it's right in this time frame, starting now, that we're getting ready for the ceremonies that I'll be doing again in April and June, or May and June. I'm not sure how it's going to fall into place. So when I start, that's where my focus goes. Because I was still following you, and I was still watching. And I know that my MO is to go, oh, I'm not going to do that right now. Or I put it in my mind to do, and then if I don't have a note, I forget it.
Gotcha.
And when I'm thinking of it, I go, oh, I need to get back to him. And then suddenly it's a month later. So I'm looking at the time. I'm like, oh, my God, I'm a terrible client. And this is what we do. This is human. This is what humans do. I see it happen to me, too. And I do sometimes take it personal. So thanks for that information about it is not personal. Because it was not personal to you either.
Exactly, and that's a great point right there. That's why it's good to hear from you. Is it's not personal. Like you just, I got to get back to Jeff, and stuff happens, and I didn't get back to him. And next thing you know, it's 2 weeks, it's a month after that, and then a dream came, right?
I have a dream. Yes, I have a dream, and I'm like, all right. I'm listening to spirit now. I'm going, all right, it's time.
Definitely, and so that's just so important for us to realize these pieces, is that to never assume. So she came back via email. She wrote back to me. And if you notice, as she's writing here, it's just like, hey, Jeff, had a dream about you. It's time for me to set up a consultation. And she goes right into, and this is in the thread 8 still, do you have a time? And she gives me specific times. And then, of course, in the dream, more specifics about, what was going on there. Nothing to go over right now necessarily, but bottom line is at the end of that email she sent me, I'm excited to talk more with you, right? So I get this, and it's a month later, and the reason I'm not following up on that in between in that month is there's a certain point where you've just got to let people go a little bit and see if they respond back. The one advantage is that you always want to feel good about is, as I always talk about this, is when you attract people to your audience. So she's in my private Facebook group. We've got her on email. Whether you're on my email list or not at that point, I didn't know, but I knew that I had your email. And then also we were on Facebook and you were in my group. So I knew I was in front of you. And that's the biggest thing, is that as long as I'm in front of that person indirectly, meaning through on my email list or my private Facebook group, for instance, it's like I'm in front of them, so they're not going to get lost. Additionally, I keep, obviously, because we have all these email threads, so I keep my emails in my inbox and also in Facebook Messenger of people that I'm interacting with, where the timing might not be right, or I can see that, they might need me in the future based on our conversation. I keep them there. And so therefore, every so often, whenever I'm starting to go through my emails, or I'll purge through my emails or purge through my Facebook Messenger, and I'll go back to these emails that are there, and there might be people that even a couple of years that I haven't even spoken with, and I'll just, hey, how's it going? We haven't spoken in a year. We haven't spoken in a few months, or it's been a while since you got back to me, and I'll follow up with them. And that's why, the whole topic of today is this shows our threads over the course of a year with some big gaps in between. But I've had year gaps or more with communications with people where I followed up with them. And not only are people impressed when you do that, but as long as you get some authentic engagement from them and permission to say, like, hey, I don't have to follow up with you anymore if you're not interested, but if the timing's not right but you're genuinely interested, I'll always say this, I'll follow up until I bleed. I'll follow up with you till I die if that's what you want me to do. But I always tell people, just let me know. If you don't want me to do this, I don't have to do that. And you'll elicit an authentic answer from them. So she got back to me. She said this. This was on May 19th. So now let's go on to the 9th thread. And this is building to kind of see how it develops. So on the 9th thread, same day. And if you notice, my emails are like short and succinct, and this is the format that I always teach people, especially when I'm working in my group or my one-on-one mentoring. So if you notice, I'm like, hey, Marty, this is awesome. I'm dying to work with you, so the fact that you're closer to that place is exciting. Notice I'm not assuming anything, and I'm also, the fact that you're closer to that place is exciting. So I'm just like warming up to it. And the fact that you're emailed me, well, I guess that's a sign, LOL, because it's funny, right? So show your personality. And then now, if you notice this, she wrote back to me basically saying, yeah, I'm excited to talk with you. I had this dream. I feel like it's time for us to do something together. And in this last sentence, I want you to know, I said we can definitely set something up after the holiday, but this is important. I say, before we do that, tell me your main motivation for want to speak and why is now a good time. So you know how we talk about sales, and selling is all about two things, need and timing, right? So this is what I'm finding out here. Even though she's coming to me, and even although at this point we've had 5 months of interaction and knowing each other or more, and her saying, hey, I had this dream and I want to work with you and blah, 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 I'm still asking, wait, before we set up a comp session, why do you want to do that and why is now a good time? So important to understand. You can never take enough time to qualify somebody, and that's exactly what I'm doing. So she comes back in the 10th thread, and I highlighted a few things here, for us to see that, is, yes, it's a sign. And I underline this in the yellow part here. I had already decided I would set something up with you. Then the dream pushed me to email this morning. So before we go on, Marty, when you wrote that, I had already decided I would set something up with you. That was before the dream, right? What does that mean?
Well, I'd already made the decision to do that. I was already coming into that direction, knowing it's time. And then I dreamt it, and that was confirmation. Yeah,
Gotcha.
you can trust yourself to make this choice and move in this direction.
And what was it, if you can remember, leading up to the point where you decided that you would want to look into working with me? And it might not be one thing. It might be a culmination of things. I'm just curious to kind of get a feel for that.
So because when I first opted in on your I can't remember what it was, the opt-in for coaches who are wanting to start a full-time business.
Yeah, so did you originally find me through a Facebook ad?
Yes, that's how
Okay.
I found you. And then you sent me to your page, and then we started this whole conversation because you asked me what motivated me to click on the letter. And that was what started that conversation.
Gotcha.
And
So in other words,
well, wow, that somebody who actually gave a shit about why I opted in on your letter.
interesting.
Because most other things I've ever done, there was no personal touch to it. That was the hook for me. That was the main hook, was that you always had that personal interest and touch, and you reached out. And you kept reaching out.
That's
just checking
awesome.
In. Short, succinct. And that made the biggest difference, because life is about relationships.
Absolutely. So you saw my Facebook ad. You clicked on it. I actually don't even realize that you came from there. I knew you were in my Facebook group. That's how I knew I got you, but I know you came from there. So that's good to know. But then, like I always tell people, when anyone comes into my group, and sometimes it takes me a lot of time to go through this and even get back to those people on Messenger. But yeah, I always send people a personal welcome email or message via Messenger, and I want to find out how they get here, why are they here, what are they looking for. So, so that's the point where you knew something was different, and we started to create a relationship from there.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So then going on the 10th thread, so now she talks, and I say, my motivation for wanting this to speak is because I have something to say. I've had the School of Hard Knocks life experience to offer people. It's time to share what I've learned, and the Spirit's pushing me to do so. So I wanted to highlight that piece because this is her need. This is why it's happening. And I'm not going to read through a lot of the other things that she wrote, but if you go to the beginning of the next page, and I highlight, in bold, the time is now, right? So in my previous question was, what's your motivation for wanting to do that? She answered it, and then she gave us a lot more detail. And then I said, why is now the right time? And then she writes, the time's now. There's no more time. I feel like I'm at this crossroads and continue the same path of letting it all go, all the bullshit stories, and moving forward. So I can really get the sense, on my end, I'm thinking, okay, here's someone that's ready. I'm checking off on my end, the qualification process. Now we could continue on. And Marty, obviously for you, it feels like you were at that point where it's just I need to do something.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, so you're right there. So that's where we're at that point. So if you notice, I write back on the 11th thread, awesome response. I can feel your passion for moving forward and all the past BS, and you're ready. I love that drive. So I just come back, and if you notice, my responses, they're short, they're sweet, they're to the point, but it's also I'm engaging that I took the time to read it because I can summarize what she's saying or the energy of it, and the next piece right there in the 11th thread, I say, so with that being said, and I underlined it, we can certainly set up a time for that next. We can certainly set up a time because she gave me an options for then. But if you notice, I say, well, why do we have to wait till after the holiday weekend? We can set it up next week, right? So in my mind, in his point is when the timing is now for somebody, people buy, people act, people do something when the timing is now. So we're writing back, and she's coming to me saying, the timing is now, and she literally said it with backup support. But then, obviously, the date here, if you notice in the 11th thread there, is May 20th, and she's saying, hey, let's set this up after, I think it was the 4th of July. And I'm like, why are we going to wait, 2 or 3 weeks?
Day.
Sorry, after Memorial Day. Yes. And I'm like, can we set it up next week? So I want to clarify that. So in other words, I want to when we get to this point with someone, my message to you guys is to say, you want to set this up as soon as possible. When you've qualified this person to this point where you know the timing is now and they're ready to do something, you want to set it up as soon as possible. And then, of course, at the end, I responded about the Cedar staff and what she's doing in more specific parts of the email, because I'm interested in learning more about her and what she's talking about. So I didn't go over the details that she wrote in this call right now, but always read through that stuff and make some comments or show your interest in the other details that people are talking about. But also, if you notice, I can get into some of those details without having a very long email or losing the focus on what the next progression is going to be for us. And then obviously she wrote back the same day in the 12th thread as to basically why she's waiting until after the holiday, obviously being out of town working the week. And I bolded it. If I totally dive in right now, it will distract me from what she's doing and going to be participating in June. So that was the biggest piece, that if we don't ask those questions, if we don't understand why as well, or if we push someone to do something that, and we don't honor what they're doing, we don't know why they're doing it. And maybe there was no reason, because I've done that with people before, and they were like, yeah, you're right, why should I wait? And there was really no good reason. But for her, there was obviously a good reason, and she knew herself really well, which is great that we did wait. So let's keep going on this. To the next page, still in that same thing in the 12th one. I bolded it as well. I'd like to get through this and be fully recovered spiritually and physically so I can shift 100% full attention to working with you and creating my business. I bolded that because obviously these are things that I'm reading. These are all signs that she's committing and all in some ways, not necessarily decided she's hiring me, but obviously in that direction. And then the last thing I underline, I really, really want to give this all I have. So Marty, for you, as you read what you wrote and the things that I bolded and I was looking for, what were you thinking in terms of where were you along that process of actually hiring me?
Oh, I was ready, and then I'm like, how am I going to pay you? So there was two things going on. I'm ready, and how am I going to pay you? And I know over my lifetime I am very easily distractible, and I can get too many things going on at once, and then I don't do any of them well. So there was a big discipline and choice for me to say, I have to do this first because I really want to then shift my focus. It was super important for me to be able to do that because I know that I can just go, I'm going to go do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I don't complete any of it.
So you know yourself well, and it's just knowing yourself, almost not trusting the fact that you would actually follow through with something like this, and that you get distracted.
Yes, or I'd be like, okay, we're going to start here, and then I'm going to put it on hold, like you had said earlier. If we start now, because maybe you said it after this.
Yeah.
Then let's wait till after, so that you're not, because you're going to have things to do.
Definitely.
And then I'm going to be, so yeah.
Gotcha, yeah, so you knowing yourself. And this is good to understand why people sometimes hesitate. And if you notice, as I take the time to do this, I'm not jumping on anything. And as well qualified as you were, even up to this point, I'm still taking the time and pausing to ask you more questions to understand. That's really what I want to point out here is that, and this is how you start to get to know where someone really is. And this is before we get to the comp session. It's so important to understand these pieces. Most coaches, as soon as they get even some type of a heartbeat, type of thing, it's like, oh, let's do a comp measure session. Right. But they don't really even know where this person is, or this person might not even be on the same page of considering hiring them. So if we go to the 13th thread, where I'm coming at it now is like, absolutely, I'll wait and work with you on that. Just curious, because obviously it was. I can see how important the next few weeks are. Can't wait to hear more. Can't wait to hear more about it. Obviously, I know it's an important thing from her. And now here's an important point where I say in the 13th thread, do you want to find a date and time that does work? If you know when would be good for you and everything is done, send me a few dates and times and we can get something scheduled. So even though we're saying, hey, let's wait till after this is done, and now we understand why, I also want to get her in the schedule. I don't want to like not have something, because getting a date in the schedule, just from my standpoint of teaching you this, is that now it gives you something to follow up on. Because I also know at this point it had been a long time coming. There were, I asked her to follow up with me in the past. She hadn't. There were times that had gone by, over a month plus, and I got back to her. So while she's coming up very well qualified and seems very well interested, I want to try to get some type of a commitment, meaning getting a date and time. If someone's willing to go through and put a date and time and schedule it with you, and they're not balking or kind of pulling away at that point and just talking a lot of BS, it's just another sign that they are more interested than not. So in the 14th thread, basically she comes back and gives me some times. But she says, I'm thinking of consulting you before I'm off to Sundance, and then making it a plan to begin in July, right? So now it's like, oh, that's right, she's doing something else on top of this, right? Because I at that point I even forgotten that she was going away and doing something in June. So in the 15th thread, I'm like, when are you off to Sundance and return? And again, the reason I ask is if we have a session and you're ready to hire me and move forward, we're going to leave the call with an action plan and things to do. And I also say that specifically because I want to start showing even more value of like, hey, we're gonna move if you hire me, right? And then in the next sentence to say, if you're going to have to shelf it because you're leaving, I think it's better to just have it once you get back so we can rock it and don't stop. That would be my recommendation. And then in the 16th thread, basically like, yeah, basically I agree. Let's wait till after the 4th. So Marty, when I came back and said that and, said, hey, well, why don't even wait? And obviously you agreed. I'm just curious your impressions on that. How was this process for you?
I was grateful that you said that because I wasn't thinking like that. I'm like, let's just do the consultation. Let's get started now. See my thing where I can get distracted, because I would have gone to dance thinking all about what I had to do. So when you said, let's wait, I'm like, I think I was relieved. Like, okay, good. You understand. You understand the importance of this too.
Yeah, absolutely. So and then obviously writing in that in the 16th thread where I bolded, I can see your point. We didn't get started. That makes complete sense. And then even at the end, and I bolded it as well, looking forward to working with you with 3 exclamation marks. So it just shows this person's engagement. And we've got to have the patience. Like the process of sales, if I can just say like this is a relationship, but if I can just say it from the standpoint of our business, this is the process of sales, and the sales takes time, and you've got to really be conscious of that timing with somebody and what's going on. And that's why when you get to a spot where there's genuine interest, you have to worry about saying too much or saying too little or whatever. It's just because if they're interested, they're interested. If they're not, they're not. And taking the time to ask more questions and find out what's going on is vital, as you can see, to the process. So if we go to the 17th thread, going back to this, if I go back to the dates of the 16th, it was on May 30th. So now the 17th is the 31st. She was obviously on my Tuesday call that day. I say, hey, let's stay connected as the 4th gets closer. Talked about, the interest in what she's doing and sharing, asking me for any prayers. And then in the meantime, I say, so I can get a good idea of where you're at, give me a summary of where you're at with your business, tell me more specific in details. So I'm trying to do that. I want to keep her engaged. I also want to know, at this point, I don't know much about her business, if anything, from the email threads here. So I want to start to get to know a little bit about it, because this way, no matter what happens moving forward, I can start to understand and I can start pulling some of those things out. And so she writes back basically, 6 days later, almost a week later in the 18th thread. And I won't go into the details of the what she wrote back, but she started talking about the ceremonies and the pieces that she was doing. But then on the next page, she talks about her business. And again, I'm not going to go into the details of her business, but as you can see, what I'm just showing you here is, as we scroll through that thread, it's a pretty detailed thread, and she's sharing the details, just like I asked her. And so whenever someone gets back to you, even though it might not be in the time frame you think or would like, again, this was another week later. She obviously was going and doing things in the meantime. So having the patience with it. But when they're answering your questions and then we're sharing the details of what's going on, they're opening up to you, and those are good things, to be looking for. So,
and at this point,
go ahead.
Jeff, I was actually, when I took a week, because when you ask me some questions, I really give it the time. Maybe I need to tell you that in my email, but I really give it thought before I answer. That's why I pause.
And that's the thing that's the thing I learned about you is later on, even this last interaction here over the last few months leading up to where we actually hired each other, is that, like, oh yeah, she doesn't like to just answer things. Like, she's got to go back and process and think and feel and then come back with something. But at that point, I didn't know that.
Right.
And that's the thing, too, is we don't know these things sometimes. As much questions I've been asking you and getting to know you through this process, there are still things that we don't know. So, I wrote back in the 19th thread, all I can say is, wow, and I just share more and about what's going on with her and where we can go, basically. And, at the end, I'm very curious to know what you learned about yourself at Sundance. And so that's where we left it in the 19th thread, and that's on June 8th. And then, of course, on the 20th, again, it's just back and forth of us, interacting at that point. So now I want to get forward because I know we have some more emails to get through, and to show you kind of where this goes. So if we get into where we go, so we did the 20th, and then we get into the 21st. So we go from June 9th to July 1st. So let's just call it a month. We're in the 21st thread. And this is where this actually came via Messenger. So we had the last interaction. We're ready to go. We're going to be doing something, basically after the July 4th holiday. And she let me know that her dad passed away. Obviously a really hard thing, really big thing. And I wrote back the same day in the 22nd thread, I'm so sorry, you're in my prayers. And, it's obviously an emotional piece. So I'm just wondering for you, when because obviously you went through Sundance, you went through a lot of experience. We had our interaction. You were ready to go and do this with me. Obviously your dad passed. When you wrote that to me, I'm just curious, around us working together, obviously your dad's passing was consuming you and your priority. What were you thinking around that, us working together, if anything, at that point?
I was mad. My dad's death was not convenient in my life. I was mad that he died right then. So that's my default emotion, is I get mad about something first. And so I was mad. I'm like, really? Right now?
Yeah.
In the midst of all my consuming. But I also knew that I needed to let you go I needed to let you know because my head would not be in it.
Gotcha. And
I didn't even know how long.
Yeah, and if you didn't say anything about that, and not that I would expect someone to say anything, just the courtesy of letting me know those pieces. But that's what I wanted to see, like, if you got back to me specifically because of that and thinking like, oh yeah, we were doing this, and I got to let them know that this is going on.
Yeah, I need to let you know that it's not going to happen right now, because I mean, we planned after the 4th. I'm like, it's not going to happen, and I don't know when it will.
Yeah, definitely. And if you know, she doesn't say that there, but it's obviously assumed that at that point, and that's why it's just obviously on my end, it's just like, oh, you're in my prayers. And so we go, here's what I want to show you now. From here, it's like, so you might be thinking, okay, well, how do you follow up with someone that was so ready to go type of thing, and then this happens, and it's like, how do you go back to someone and not sound insensitive, like, hey, your dad just died, but what about hiring me, right? It's like, what do you do? Like, how do you do this? And that's why it's a good thing to work with people on, and it's also a good thing to show that, when someone's ready to go, someone's ready to go. And that's why timing is everything, because look what happened to the timing. The timing went from its peak to having the dream to, like, let's do this thing, to, well, there's a bunch of stuff going on in my life. Why don't we wait? And it makes sense to wait, to this happening. So it just shows you, like, this is why timing is everything. So we go to the 23rd thread, and now we're 2 weeks later, and if you notice, I'm just being supportive, and I'm just like, hey, you're in my thoughts and prayers, and she wrote back, thank you, Going to the 25th thread, and that's basically the end of the month, 2 weeks later. And if you notice here, I'm actually writing a little bit more in the 25th thread. Hey, I just wanted to check and see how you're doing. And this is what I want to show you what I did is I also want to ask you how you'd like me to follow up with you about us working together. I want to be sensitive to what's going on, but I also know that you want to move forward with your business and just don't know the timing of it all with the recent changes in your life. Please let me know what you're thinking, and I will honor where you're at and what you want. So I'm a big advocate of, like, when you don't know what to do, just ask the person. I'm a big fan of just authentic spaces. So it's like I'm in the conflict of, like, well, I know just because her dad passed away, it doesn't mean she doesn't want to grow her business anymore. Granted, it could be an assumption, but it's like wants in our lives don't change necessarily. It just our focus shifts typically, when something happens, especially something like that. So I'm just saying, like, hey, listen, I'm saying, how do you want me to follow up with you? So I'm curious, Marty, but before we even look at the next response in 26, like, what was when I wrote that to you, and this is basically just under a month after this happening, what was your impression? How did that come across to you?
It's also so very, very surreal. So I remember reading it and going, I have no idea. I don't know. I got nothing. I have no idea what. And I appreciated that you were staying in touch and asking me. I don't really know what to do, so you give me instruction. Like, where do we need to go?
Exactly.
And that was where I'm like, I got nothing. I was in that space of I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you wrote, really.
No.
Yeah, I mean, if you see in 26, you said, thanks for checking in, and then on the next page, I'll skip through some of the things that you wrote where in the middle I have it bolded. I'm not sure what to say about checking in with me. My sense is to trust your intuitive self and check in when you check in. So obviously, obviously I can tell at this point, like, yeah, she's rocked, like anyone most likely would be with the loss of a parent, and she's basically just saying, you know what, use your sense, use your sense.
Right.
And then in 27, I just wrote back, I appreciate your honesty. I still have my parents around. I can't imagine this. And it basically just, honor where you're at. And when the timing's right for you, we'll move forward with this. So I said I'll be in touch or in my prayers. So just kind of left it at that. And so now if we're moving forward, that was on July 29th. Now if you notice, on the 28th thread, now it's September 7th. So let's just call it August, September. So let's just say, a month and a half roughly, just under that. Just quick, how you doing? You've been on my mind. You actually responded the next day, a little clearer, which is amazing, right? Like you said. But, thanks for asking, how are you? So I'm just like, she's on my mind, and this goes to show you, like, what I do is like, obviously she's been on my mind, but I'm not seeing her in my Facebook group anymore, but I still have this email thread in my email. So like I said, every time I'll go through and I scroll through, usually on a weekly basis, just to see who's still in my email thread, and I would come across Marty, and I'd be like, and I'd look at our last thread and be like, okay, well, when did we write back? What was going on? How long has it been since then? Should I send an email? Should I not send an email? And so, a month and a half later, it was just like, hey, just you're on my mind. Hope you're doing well. And I'm just getting a barometer for where she's feeling and letting know that I'm thinking about her. And, basically same thing. She's still working through stuff. She's still grieving. She's still, that I can tell clearly from what she wrote in 29 that that's her focus still. But also there was a point where she says, I'm tired of feeling sad, and I'm walking through it. So whether it was walking or working through it, either way, I can tell she's doing something about it. And I'll just continue on. So when we get to the point where we start a transition again. So in the 30th email, we get to the point where, I'm glad you're tired of feeling sad. You're a happy person, deserves happiness. Looking forward to talking more. and I just, share answering a question like things are well for me, enjoying the beautiful fall. So that was on the 12th of September. So now let's go to the 31st email. Now we're in November. So 2 months later? And here's where I'm getting more direct, because I'm like, okay, there's no time limit or right or wrong for grieving with somebody, right? But I'm like, all right, so her dad passed away in July. It's been almost a half year right now. I just want to see, where she's at. And I go off the last thread, and I'm writing, hoping that you're still feeling clearer and more consistently happy. And this is the key where I say here, I also want to be fairly direct and ask where you are about moving forward with your coaching business. I know you really wanted it, and the timing was not right with your situation. And I say, so I wanted to bring it up because if the timing is right, I would love to be working with you side by side, mentoring you towards to what you want to create. I know you'll let me know honestly where you're at. Looking forward to it. So I'm just giving her that space and saying, like, hey, I know you're going to be honest with me, but I also want to let you know that, let me know about the situation, and I'm still trying to be sensitive. So she wrote back in 32, and this is, the 21st, so basically 3 weeks later, and even shares, I've taken the time to delay. I bolded it to consider where I'm at. And saying I bolded it as well. I just want to get through the holidays. So, Marty, quick thoughts on that, my directness, if you will.
I very much appreciate your directness. And is that the one where I did I'm mad that I'm mad and all those?
Yeah, and that was another email.
When you asked me, this is, again, I was really considering where am I really? And because it was from the 3rd to the 21st.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was really looking at where am I really? What am I really feeling? Because as much as I'm moving through it, I still was, I was mad. I was just mad, and I think I wrote that in here, where I was just mad, and I didn't really know that I was mad until you asked the question, being your direct self. And then I got to look at that and go, where am I really at? Because there's some things I'm not looking at, and I'm not wanting to feel, because I don't want to feel that.
So really, at the end of the day, you appreciate the directness, and the directness was causing you to, it stirred up some emotion, and it caused you to have to answer those questions.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you look at it, and this is in the 32nd thread here, in between the bolded areas, she's like, I've been mostly mad. I was mad that I'm so sad, and then as I was mad that I was mad, and I was mad that I was sad, and on and on. And this is interesting because this leads into the next email that I wrote a couple days later. And she wrote at the end of that email, she's like, I'll check in again around the new year. But I wrote on the 23rd and the 32nd, the 33rd thread here is, and this is where I wrote authentically. I wrote, at first when I began to read your message, I thought I was reading something out of Dr. Seuss, LOL. And I wrote, in parentheses, that will hopefully make you laugh and not piss you off. But at least my intention was to make you smile, so forth and so on. And I just, I kind of left it like, yeah, we'll definitely check in after the new year. But I wanted to also be uplifting, and I wasn't trying to be funny, but because that was my actual reaction when I read it. I'm like, wow, this just feels like I'm reading Dr. Seuss,
You're the first one that said that.
Oh, really? And so
it did make me laugh.
Which is interesting because look at, and so we'll go through this. This gets us to the finish here. Is that was on November 23rd, and then we go to the 34th thread. Basically, a month later, on December 22nd, I was like wishing you a Merry Christmas. So on my end, I could be thinking like, okay, I really pissed her off, here's a woman who's grieving and lost her father, and I'm like, she's sharing her deepest emotions with me, and I'm like, yeah, you sound like Dr. Seuss,
Oh God, I apologize.
No, but and that's the thing. I'm bringing that out because of course it crossed my mind, but I'm at the point where it's like I know what I wrote, and how I wrote it in parentheses, and that's why I write those things, because I cover myself. I don't just like, hey, you sound like Dr. Seuss. I write the parentheses. I write the LOL. I write so that there's no assumption on it and they know my intention. But a lot of coaches will go into their head when people don't get back, or people are afraid to be direct. And then if people don't get back to them, especially with these time gaps, that's when people start to go into their head, oh my God, I was too direct. I said something to piss someone off. And this causes people typically, or coaches, to not be themselves. And what I'm showing you here is be yourself. You can be funny even potentially in a really hard situation, and it can be helpful. And it just shows your personality and who you are. And it was good to know like where you were in terms of you did think it was funny. You just didn't get back to me because obviously you didn't really necessarily need to.
I forgot. That's the thing about this grieving process. I forget. I think I did. I thought I got back to you.
Interesting. Right?
I did. I thought I got, and it still happens. That still happens today even. It's been 7 months now. It still happens. I'll think I did something,
the reality
and I look back and I'm like, I didn't do that. I thought I did, but I didn't. Yeah.
So this is the key. So now we're going to go to the 35th thread, and it's the following year, and it's the 11th of January. And this is, like a couple months since I wrote that Dr. Seuss comment. It's a month almost since, the 22nd of December, just under that. And I wrote, hey, how are you? Haven't heard back from you since the last response. Hopefully well, and love to hear how you're doing. And I wanted to go back with, instead of just the same thing of, hey, I'm curious where you're at, blah, blah, blah. I didn't want to beat that down because obviously it's out there. But at this point, I'm like, I want to follow up because she said to follow up in the new year. So I came back and I said, I'm not sure if you noticed in my group, I just relaunched the Visibility Challenge with a few new elements. And thought of you and thought it might be a good way to get back into the groove of things to begin, where you left off making videos. Because obviously, like I said, she had started the Visibility Challenge the prior year. And I say, hey, just a thought, love to hear from you, And then if you go back down to 36, she wrote me, 4 days later, and basically like, holy smokes, like, I bolded, I have no idea, if I'm actually ready, but obviously she forgot. My apology, she said, and I have no idea if I'm actually ready, but I want to do something. My feeling is maybe your combo of life and business coaching together. I'll check out the group. She said, let's plan a time to talk. And what I want to point here is as we get, close to closing, the email thread, I know there's a bunch more, but I want to get to the point here is she wrote back on the 15th, on now we go to the 37th thread. I wrote back the next day. I go right back to qualifying her. Even though it's a year later almost, right? Great to hear from you. Even better to hear you're feeling lighter. Love to plan a time to talk. Let me know more specifically what you're thinking in terms of your motivation for wanting to do so. So I'm curious, Marty, quick, like when I said that to you, coming back, asking you almost the same question I did the first time you said, let's talk, what were your thoughts? I know you responded, but what were your quick thoughts on that?
I have no effing idea is what my first thought was. And then I'm like, but I just knew I feel spirit pushing me in that direction. Because I knew when my dad died it was evolving. Whatever I thought I was going to do was evolving. So I went, I don't know. I don't know. Give me some time. Let me think about that. Right? Let me give me some thought.
And it was interesting, too, because on the 38th thread was the next day on the 17th, and you actually came to my Tuesday call that day, and you commented, today was the first day I've done anything of getting engaged in any form of business. Thanks for a great call. So, again, it shows the value of having those weekly live events. And then the 39th thread, the day later, great to hear you on the call. You're stepping back into the game. I'll look forward to your response when you're ready. And here's where, you went into in the next thread, the 40th thread, about your motivation for wanting to have a call with you. And again, I'm not going to go over that now, but she really, again, took the time. And this is the point, is going through and taking the time. And then towards the end of that, before she says, looking forward to speaking with you soon, I bolded it. It says, now how do I pull this all together and make it manifest in the world? And, I go back to her in the next thread, the 41st thread, and basically, the next step is we can pull it all together because I can assist you doing that, And I'd say the next step would be a separate complimentary session where we can start to get a feel of pulling it together. If you feel this would be the right step, we can go over how you can hire me and move forward. So that's the key phrase right there. That's my transition back into the complimentary session at the end of the 41st thread and I bolded it, is if you still feel this is the right step, then we can go over how you can hire me and move forward. And so then, she wrote back to me, sorry, on the next page, and I even say one more thing, and I highlighted it. It says, before we set up that call, though, I want to ask, why is now the right timing for this? And I say, you've been through a lot, and while sometimes it can feel like the timing's never right, we just have to know our hearts when enough is enough to pull the trigger. So that's the last piece I wanted to go over there was, even though now I got the motivation and I say, hey, yeah, we can set this call up, I've got the motivation again, but I wanted to clarify the timing. Even at this point, a year later, I'm still qualifying that. And so, obviously, Marty, you took the time, about 5 days, to write the response. And you sent quite the response there in the 40-second thread. But just impressions, as I write that back to you, like, hey, yeah, let's do this. But before that, do that, why now? Like, how was it? Like, was it too monotonous? Or was I, beating a dead horse? Some people, they ask, oh, my God, you're asking it again. Why are you asking it again at this point? Obviously, you took the time and answered it very detailed, but what was your impression about me asking those seemingly same questions again?
You know what? I didn't even consider that it was the same question. I just knew that you were asking me again because I really needed to be clear for myself. I wasn't thinking that it was a repeat question because it had already been a year, or 6 months, whatever that was. So I'm like, yeah, why is now the right time? So I really just went, oh, yeah, my dad's died, and why is now the right time? Because I'm still in the middle of grieving. It's not even been a year.
Yeah.
So that's where I went with it. Like, okay, why is now?
And that's great. It's good to hear that feedback. And so for people out there, it's like you can never ask enough questions. So after the 40-second email thread, we won't go through all the detail there, obviously, but she's really giving this detailed answer. In the 40-second thread, I mean, really, when I wrote, that's one, if not the best answer I've ever heard. I was like, wow, that for the timing, that was the best thing. And so this is the last part that I'll just run through quick to close, is just to show you from there. Now once you've kind of checked off the boxes, so to speak, and I say, great, now it's time to set up a complimentary session. And again, I say from there, if everything feels good, we can talk about the details about you hiring me and beginning our work together. If you notice, even though it's obvious at this point, I still write those things because I want someone going to this call, they've got to be in that spot like, okay, I'm doing this because I'm considering hiring Jeff. And then I give them a couple times, and, obviously in the 44th, she gets back to me. We schedule the time. In the 45th and the 46th, we get it down. And then once we get to that point, if I just skip to the 47th thread, and this is it's towards the end, this is the email I send to confirm the complimentary session. This is the time of our call. Call me here. And then I ask them these 4 questions. And again, if you notice, these 4 questions I've already asked at this point. But again, it further qualifies where the person's at, your motivation for wanting the call, what do you hope to achieve, have you ever worked with a coach, right? And then if you see value in our time together, would you consider hiring me? And if so, why is now the right timing? And if you notice right before that, where it says important in the bolded part, after the ... part, I even wrote, I know you've answered some of these through our email conversations, but it's good to get it summarized and clear here. I actually added that part to my, if you will, cut and paste email because at this point we had answered it quite a bit. So I just added that in because I don't want her to think I'm being overly redundant or I'm like, it's just...
And here's where I went, really? Again? Okay.
Right. Interesting. So you did say that.
I did.
Okay. Did you see my little disclaimer saying I know I've asked these basically a million times?
I absolutely did. I saw it. I'm like, really? Come on, Jeff.
Okay.
All right. I'll answer the questions.
But and you did. You answered them, and we have to go through those pieces again. But this is wrapping it up. But the point is I want you to show people when you talk about the fundamentals, when you talk about being thorough. You can't be thorough enough. And at this point, did I need to ask those again? No. But this is my procedure, right? And I recognize that it would be redundant at that point, and that's why I even tailored it a little bit that I just went over. Of like, hey, I know, basically it's redundant, but just basically just answer them again,
You're killing me, dude.
And I gave her a reason. But the last part I'll say there from my end is that, like, never assume, always take your time, and get to the right spot. And when you're in the right spot, both people can come together. And obviously, when we scheduled the call, we had our call, and obviously you hired me at that point, and we're here today. So I've said my piece, but in closing this, for you, Marty, what was it like with this whole process? And now you're obviously hearing my end, and obviously you know your end. But what was it? What was the biggest standout thing for you hearing it all put together now in terms of this process, in terms of your buying process and decision process? How can you summarize that based on how I approached it with you?
That you stayed engaged. When you recognized that I was ready after January, that you continued to ask me the questions, and that helped me get clear. I don't know if everybody processes that way, but I know that's what I do. And then you also trusted my timing, and I let you know that. Finally, I let you know, hey, I'm going to think about this and get back to you. So your persistence, consistent, always direct, and compassionate. I always felt that coming through, even when you were really, really direct with me about where do we go from here. I always felt your compassion and the love that you have for anybody being successful, but specifically me in that moment.
Awesome. So that was the most important piece of the whole process.
The relationship.
Yeah.
Awesome. That you stayed in the relationship with me no matter how long it went.
That's good to hear. Yep, and that's what I want to teach people, is that just stay engaged with people. Don't make any assumptions. Take along the way, honor their agenda, honor their timing, find out about it. And, in the last thread 49, it's the date 2/1, February 1st, which is last week. And, this email thread started, I think it was in March sometime of the prior year. And obviously our interaction started even, prior to that. So that's basically how to follow up with someone for a year to get a new client. So Marty, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate you, opening up and being a part of this process, and of course grateful for, being my client now as well.
Thank you.